Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. The old saying, a leader can't demand respect, they must earn it, is absolutely true. And to do so involves trust. So, how can we build that trust and become a better leader? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Dr. Dominic Loughlin is a people management specialist. He spent much of his career researching what makes a good leader. Trust, he says, is crucial between managers and staff. Without it, you can't build a great team. As part of his PhD, Dominic surveyed more than 1,100 people from several countries, including the US, UK, Canada, Australia and the Philippines. He explains to Chris Ashmore what the results revealed when it came to determining a good leader versus a bad one. As for a good one, he says, a key finding depends a lot on their character.
Things like honesty, following words with actions, honouring commitments, and there's an element of consistency in that. So it's not just telling the truth occasionally or when it's convenient, but actually trying to be consistent in the way people present themselves. There's a kind of an element of they're perceived as like a person of integrity, wherever they happen to be, and putting the needs of those who are reporting to them first and basing their decisions on the right thing to do rather than, on sort of purely profit-driven motive. That ability to strike the appropriate balance between the needs of the individuals and the team and the organisation. Sometimes that's a hard balance. So they also thought about the needs of team members before their own needs, and sometimes they would sacrifice their own comfort and bonuses to help the team out when that was necessary. So there's an element of kind of selflessness there that came through in the survey for the best managers. To talk about the sort of bad leaders, I suppose one of the main things that came through there was that it was kind of like they were focused mostly on their career and they didn't mind what sort of collateral damage was done on the way through. If they could just get the result that was needed and move on, then all was fine.
Well, in your book, you write about trust, and why is trust between managers and staff crucial?
There's been quite a lot of academic research on trust in the last 50 years. And so I was sort of coming from a background of having looked at that for my PhD. And there's one particularly interesting diagram, Dirks and Ferrin in 2002. They did this diagram where they showed that all these really good things that organizations want, like job performance and job satisfaction and satisfaction with the leader and belief in what they're being told and commitment to the organization, all of those things depend on trust. And that was an analysis of the previous more than 300 academic articles that they examined. So they tried to do a bit of a summary. So trust is really crucial. And I think the reason why it's so crucial is that, in a sense, most of us would kind of say, well, I don't really want to work for someone if I don't trust them. So there's that kind of like, anecdotal, we all know that we think trust is important. But what was interesting to me was that they found from an academic point of view that trust was also critical for the business as a whole. So I think that's why trust is so important, that it's kind of getting at that difficult to define thing, which we all want in our workplace, that kind of esprit de corps, that kind of we're getting on well, where, we've got each other's backs. Those sorts of expressions, basically, in my view, would come down to trust.
Well, how then do you build trust?
First of all, it's about mindset, and that's about particularly for new managers, not being afraid to admit when you make a mistake. That's something that kind of goes against most of our sort of natural reaction. But actually, by fostering that kind of learning environment through example, the people working in the team weren't fearful of making a mistake. And so that led to more sort of innovation and more sort of like people's comfort levels with trying new things. And that was actually a really good way to generate productivity. So that thing of being able to make a mistake helps to build trust. And the other thing is that the managers took responsibility for their actions. So they didn't look to blame other people that were working for them. So they would own up to, okay, well, I've tried this and it hasn't worked, or we've done this and, that's my responsibility. And what that tends to do, because people are a little bit more vulnerable in that situation when they're sort of being open with their team, they end up being described as, down to earth and sort of humble, and people feel like they can be open with them as well. So it helps. I suppose the other thing about trust and in the workplace is a lot of it is about relationships. So we want to have, appropriate professional relationships with our colleagues and with our managers. But in order to do that, we've got to really trust them to be open about where we're at and how we're traveling. So they were a couple of key things. There was a couple of others around decision-making and delegation. So people really, when they feel like the manager's consulting them or the leader's consulting them about decisions that have to be made or problems that the business is facing, especially things that affect their own work, people feel that then, okay, well, now I know what's going on. I don't feel like things are being hidden or there's some sort of hidden agenda going on. I'm being told, I'm getting the right information. And if I'm in that situation, I feel much more inclined to work with my leader to try and resolve that problem or to reach a solution. And I suppose the other last thing would be the flip side of, people trusting you is you've also got to trust them. So in a sense, it's also about delegating appropriately, of like giving people the resources and the time, but then also just letting them choose the way they go about their work. So there's an element of that being important too, that you trust them to do the work without necessarily micromanaging them. Or, of course, you need appropriate check-ins, but not sort of going overboard.
Well, one of the attributes of a good leader is the ability to motivate and inspire the team. How do you suggest that managers can do that?
Yeah, I think a lot of the inspiration kind of comes from the leaders and managers being interested in a good outcome for the client, whether it's an internal client or external client. So there's that kind of part of that element of trust is they've got to be professionally good as well as personally good. So you can't, be a hopeless manager and build trust, in that sense. So there's that kind of aspiration to provide a really good outcome, service, product. And then there's the being prepared to really jump in and help when things get really busy. So people don't want to be micromanaged on the one hand, but they want to be assisted when things are, going a bit crazy. That's one way that really helps to motivate and inspire, is to get in and do some of the work from time to time as it's needed. I think also that idea of, trying to have a bit of fun in the workplace as well, that people feel like, it's a place where it's not all about just doing the work. It's about so we work hard in the up times, but we can also have a bit of camaraderie, a bit of fun in the down times, or combine things that sort of make it more enjoyable. I think probably the last thing, and probably the most important about inspiration or inspiring people, is really the communication. It's really important to have those one-to-one conversations, whether it be giving people some guidance, or it could just be talking to them about where they want to be or what their goals are, those sorts of important, that openness to where people want to be, what's their goal, what's their aim. And then I think also the being open to suggestions yourself from people who might want to suggest improvements or other ways of doing things. And then as part of that communication, I'd say that kind of publicly rewarding good outcomes, is important. So people sort of get that kudos from their colleagues. They can see that, oh, wow, was really worth all that extra effort, and I got that acknowledgement, even if it's just a small thing like a lunch or a voucher or just public praise. It just really helps people to feel that their work is worthwhile and motivates them to keep going.
And of course, when staff are not doing the right thing, if they're doing the wrong thing,
yes.
How does a boss deal with that?
So that's interesting, because we've just been talking earlier on about the importance of sort of having high standards and striving for that. I think it's interesting that the honesty and consistency is also part of leading by example, but it's also part of not letting people lower that standard. So there is an expectation, if you want to achieve really good outcomes, that you occasionally will have to call people to account from time to time. And I think, again, most of us personally don't really like those potentially difficult conversations or that potential conflict. And so it can be hard to do that. But that's not the sort of thing you'd be doing in public. You do that one-on-one with someone. And I think you need to really have a conversation which helps to ascertain, is it a lack of training? Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it just an error? Or is it a lack of effort and a lack of motivation? Or is the person just in the wrong role? So there are many different reasons why something could go wrong, or people might do the wrong thing. So it's important to be clear about what that is, and then put in place the appropriate solution once you've established what the actual problem is. It's true that sometimes people really just need to go and work somewhere else because they're not happy and this is not the right place for them. And there are some people who are trying to, I guess, get paid for not doing very much. And so you also have to deal with that. So they're real things. But most of the time, it's usually about, people not being aware or people not having the right training. So it's probably important to investigate that and find out which you're dealing with before you jump to conclusions, I'd say.
Before we wrap up, Dominic, any final thoughts on how someone can become a better leader?
The best managers and leaders have good character. And the good thing is that's something we can work on ourselves. We can work on our honesty. We can work on our openness, our vulnerability. But the other thing is that leads to beneficial business outcomes and also leads to a better workplace for people. So I think we can encourage that approach in new managers in particular to try and combat the idea that, it's all about politicking and getting ahead yourself, that actually we have the opportunity, especially with things like quiet quitting and some of the other current topical issues, to really engage people and say, well, there is a better way to manage and it will actually bring you long-term success.
That was People Management Specialist, Dr. Dominic Loughlin. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.